I've shared stories before, but I have another story from when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I figure it's a decent cautionary tale, so I might as well share it with everyone. It was the middle of a summer day, and I was at home with my mother. It was a pretty regular day in all actuality, until I started to hear some loud, incomprehensible yelling coming from outside. I looked out the window, only to see a strange old man in the middle of the street yelling. I had always lived in this suburb and the surrounding area, and I didn't recognize this guy at all. I told my mom I was going to see what was going on, and I headed outside to meet this guy. I walked right up to him and asked him if something was wrong. I didn't think he was homeless, but he was pretty messily dressed. I was also pretty sure he was more than a little bit drunk. He proceeded to tell me he couldn't find the bus stop. This surprised me, as the bus stop was literally just right down the street and a single left turn from where we were, maybe a 5-minute walk at the most. I tried to explain to the man where he should go, and we kind of argued for a bit before he asked if I could just walk him over there. At this point, he was so loud and obnoxious, I figured I'd do it just to get him out of the neighborhood's hair. I agreed and walked him 5 minutes away down the street. Fast forward, now he's asking me questions about my age, what I was doing with my life at the time, school obviously, and various other things. I get to the bus stop, but as I'm about to leave, he very suddenly changed his story. He said instead now he needed to get to his house and didn't know where to go. This gave me major red flag vibes, but the street where the address he gave me was about another 5 minutes away. Because I was a dumb young teenager though, I was stupidly overconfident. After all, I had lived in this area all my life. I was a 16-year-old and 180 pounds of mostly muscle. I was almost a man in my prime. I figured I was untouchable, especially by such an old man. Also, it was smack dab right in the middle of a sunny day. I agreed to walk this man to his house. In the back of my mind though, I was really weirded out by the change from the bus stop to a random house. We lived in a nice suburb, and no offense, but this guy's looks did not seem to fit the bill. Anyway, as we approached this house, his questions started to get real strange. He started going on and on about being so lonely and how no one would ever visit him. He then dropped this bomb on me. He asked if my mom could come live with us and said he could be the man of the house for both of us. I laughed uncomfortably. We finally got to the driveway to his place. My creep meter was going off the rails and hit an all-time high. He tried desperately to convince me he was too weak to open the door and get in. This was finally the point where my brain just told me not to do it. Somehow during this, I shot my best friend and at the time neighbor a quick text of the address. I told him to call the cops if I didn't text back within 10 minutes. He started to get very aggressive with me. I told him though there was no way I was going to help him into his house. He started trying to offer me alcohol as a reward for doing so. His persistence was really off-putting. I didn't understand though how dangerous this was until later. I was just really unnerved. All of a sudden, the dude just bolted into his house and back in within the span of a minute and shoved a water bottle into my hands. He grabbed my arm, making me promise to return and visit him. I lied and said I would, completely bewildered. Only then did he release his surprisingly strong grip on my arm. I noped the fuck out of there and dumped that water out onto the grass. I never saw him around again after that, which did make me happy, but it was also quite strange. This was an extremely small neighborhood. So if I had just taken him over to his house and he'd gone inside, how come I had never seen him again? Either way, I guess I can't complain about not running into him. If you're ever in that sort of situation getting red flags, just walk away. Don't try to be nice. I took a bunch of risks assuming I was invincible, and it was the middle of the day, along with occurring in my neighborhood. But all those things don't make you invincible. I was 23 years old in grad school, working toward my MLIS and working part-time at the West Valley Library. I wasn't paid much at West Valley, so I applied for a position at the larger Stone River Library System, SRLS. I was hired there very quickly. This new position required me to work hours at the Crestmont and Cherry Lane branches as well, but I continued working at West Valley too. My first shift with the SRLS was Monday night at the Cherry Lane branch. I didn't need very much training because I was already familiar with all the software they used and working with the public as well. One of my new coworkers, though, was explaining some of the unique policies in this library. During this, a patron came up and asked where he could find books about World War II. My coworker asked if I could handle the question, and I said I could. Before the coworker walked away, he jokingly said to the patron, "Take it easy on her, she's new." This patron was very heavy-set and looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I told him he'd want to look at the 940s in the adult nonfiction section. He wandered away, only to several minutes later come back. He told me he was having trouble finding the section, and perhaps I could help him find the book he wanted. I started searching our system for the specific title he'd requested. During this, he introduced himself to me as Jim and extended his hand over the desk to shake my hand. I awkwardly took it and shook his hand back and went back to searching for this book. He was acting overly familiar with me and was very talkative, telling me all about himself. Patrons being overly familiar and talkative isn't really unusual in public libraries. Often, people come there just to have someone to talk to, so we're conditioned to kind of listen to people as we work, as long as it doesn't interfere with providing assistance to other patrons. Turned out we didn't own the title he was looking for. I told him I could place a hold on it though, and have it sent here from another branch. I placed the hold and told him he would get a phone call when the book arrived for him. He then told me his phone number on his account was his home phone number, but he'd prefer if we called his cell phone. I offered to change the phone number for notifications to his cell number. He said he didn't want to do that because his wife wanted calls about her books at home. He then suggested that instead I could take his cell phone number and call him personally when his book arrived. Now that was a really strange request. I told him I could not do that. After all, I don't handle the items arriving from other libraries, and I'm only there very part-time hours. He attempted a very sad puppy dog face and said, "Come on, please, for me." I told him best I could do was change the phone number on his account to his cell phone. He declined and did not press the issue any further. He then asked if I could show him to the 940s in adult nonfiction. I walked across the library to the section with him. I don't remember our exact conversation in the stacks, but he was clearly trying to flirt with me, and at some point said something along the lines of, "You look so young, but you really seem to know what you're doing. It's real hard to believe you're new here." I told him I was only new to this library system, but I'd worked at other ones nearby for several months. He then dropped all pretense of looking for World War II books and started grilling me with personal questions. I sidestepped as best as I could and completely made up the few things I did tell him. Unfortunately, I've always had trouble politely disengaging from uncomfortable situations like this. After around 15 minutes, I told him the library was real busy tonight and I needed to get back to the circulation desk. As I turned to walk out of the aisle, he grabbed my wrist to stop me. He held it very tightly and whispered to me, "You should give me your number." I was completely taken aback that he'd touched me, and I wasn't concerned about being polite anymore. I screamed that I was not interested and yanked my arm out of his grasp. I power walked back to the circulation desk and into the staff room, where I then caught shit from the supervisor on duty for disappearing for 20 minutes. By the time my chat with the supervisor was over, Jim had left the library. I quickly went back to the computer where I'd placed the hold for him. I opened the transaction log and opened his library account from there. I wrote down his card number, his full name, and his address. The next day was my first day of work at the Crestmont branch. It was fairly uneventful. Thursday, I worked there again. When I arrived, the supervisor told me someone had called looking for me on Wednesday, but had declined to leave a message. I had no idea who it could have been, so I just shrugged the incidents off. Later that day, a coworker told me there was someone on the phone for me. I picked up the call only to realize it was Jim. He said he was just calling me to talk. This had the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I realized he must have been the person who had called looking for me yesterday too. I told him I couldn't just talk to people on the phone while at work and to not call here again. He told me if I gave him my cell number, he could call me when I'm not at work and we could talk then. I told him once again that I was not interested and hung up the phone. My supervisor overheard this. I explained what had happened at the Cherry Lane branch, and she wrote up an incident report about everything. She then sent this to the director of SRLS and the supervisors of all 4 branches. Well, Friday afternoon, the director called me at home. This was very unusual. He told me that Jim had called all 4 branches on Wednesday and showed up at each of them as well trying to find me. He asked where I was and when I would be working next. The director emailed me a letter drafted by an SRLS lawyer. He planned to send this to Jim and asked me to read it over to make sure everything was accurate. The letter summarized all the incidents and warned Jim that library patrons are not permitted to interfere with a library employee while she's performing her duties. That all future interactions with library employees would be based on library services and would not become personal. Failure to comply would result in him being banned for some period of time commensurate with his misconduct. I told the director I thought this might be a little bit harsh. Maybe I could just be overreacting about the whole situation. He said, though, that everything about Jim's interactions with me had been very inappropriate. He wanted to stop this in its tracks before it got any worse. I agreed that he should send that letter. On Sunday, I worked at the West Valley Library again. Shortly after it opened, I answered a call from Jim. I was shocked and scared, because I'd never told him I worked at this particular library. He said he really wanted to see me, and that if I wouldn't talk on the phone, he would come in and we'd talk in person. I wanted to be completely clear, so I told him that I was sorry if I gave him the wrong impression, but I was really not interested in talking to him ever again.
I thought you were a nice person. You seem so nice. You can't treat me like this.
I said I had to go and hung up the phone. A coworker who had overheard convinced me to file a police report just in case. The police arrived shortly after that, and I sat down with them and went over everything. They told me they were going to stop by Jim's house the next day to speak with him and see where things stand. They also told me if I saw him following me anywhere, I should call 911 immediately. Monday night, I worked at Cherry Lane again. I was kind of nervous Jim might come in, since he knew I would be working there. He didn't show up, though. My coworkers and I walked to the staff parking lot together after closing. As we approached our cars, though, I could see that my car's hood was popped. As we got even closer, I saw all 4 windows plus the front and rear windshields had been smashed in. There were dozens of deep dents to the metal panels, and cracks and holes punched through the bumpers and other plastic sections of the car. Inside, it looked like someone had poured bleach all over the black cloth seats. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my legs stopped supporting me, and I collapsed onto the blacktop. I immediately threw up. That was the first and only time in my life I actually experienced panic. My coworkers hoisted me back up and half dragged me back into the library, where they called 911. When the police arrived, I told them about Jim. They located his car several blocks away. Inside it, they found empty bleach containers, a hammer, and a full set of his clothing: shoes, socks, pants, underwear, a shirt, and a sweater. When they visited his house, his wife told the police he was at a local bar watching a football game. Well, the police were never able to locate Jim after. As far as I understand, he just never returned to his house or his wife. I didn't stick around very long to find out, though. Over the next 2 days, I quit both of my jobs, dropped out of school, broke my apartment lease, and moved several hundred miles away. In the 3rd grade, I had this strange short teacher named Mrs. Todd. She was always super nice to me in particular in class. She'd always call on me to do all the fun activities first, compliment me whenever I did something even remotely right, and was just generally very positive toward me. At the time, I thought she was perhaps my favorite person in the entire world. I remember even telling my mother all the time how much I loved Mrs. Todd. Anyway, one day I sat down at my desk. I opened it to put all my school crap inside when shockingly, I saw there was a Victoria's Secret magazine sitting in the pull-out drawer. The kid sitting next to me noticed how shocked I was. I thought I was going to get in some real trouble. We started talking about how this could have possibly gotten in there. Almost immediately, as soon as she saw I noticed it, Miss Todd walked up and asked, "Well, what have you got here?" I was seriously confused. I told her it was just sitting in my desk when I got there this morning. She looked directly at me and told me the kid sitting next to me must have slipped it in there. She kept on repeating that over and over again to both him and I. She did this until I finally admitted that it must have been the truth. Only a few days after that, she approached me after class to tell me about this very special field trip I could go on if I kept doing so good in class. It would be a special trip with just her and I to the Gulf of Mexico for an entire weekend. I remember being so excited about that possibility at the time. However, very shortly after, she suddenly got replaced at the school, and we got this new teacher that didn't seem to like me quite so much. I was very heartbroken at the time. It wasn't until many years later that I realized what was really going on there. I hadn't even noticed a single thing at the time was off. It scares me still, thinking about how easily something like that can happen, and everyone around just goes along with it. Now I sure have got a story to share. I have this hunting spot that I frequent quite often. It's not crazy far off the grid or anything like that. The terrain is a pain in the ass, but it's a pretty well-hidden spot that's also close by my home. Anyway, I hunt a lot of small game there. I see a ton of mule deer anytime I go out. One morning, I get there at about 5:30 a.m. I have some time to kill before I start my hike in. I have an odd feeling in the parking lot, but I chalked it up to having too much coffee on an empty stomach, giving me some anxiety to start the day. I decided to start hiking in. When about 300 yards into it, I noticed this pile of downed trees, branches, and debris that I hadn't seen there before. It was my first time hunting in this particular place in this particular season. I figured some folks must have come out and done some fire mitigation work or something. I really didn't pay too much attention to it until I noticed there was an odd amount of movement coming from that pile. They were pretty small movements, but it stuck out like a sore thumb when this big brush pile was wiggling on a still day. It was also about 5:45 a.m. The wilderness just sort of has this stillness to it at that time that any movement at all is noticeable. I stopped and started examining this pile, trying to figure out what exactly was going on here. I figured there must be like a rabbit in there or something, maybe some squirrels. I figured I'd definitely hit the jackpot, and I was about to bag a really big haul. I started deciding the best way to flush out whatever was in there, and still have my shotgun up in time to take a good shot. I realized I was standing by a decent-sized branch, and my best move was to stomp on it and startle them. If all went according to plan, everything would freeze and then whatever was in there would dart right out. I tried to figure out where the rabbit would come out of, get ready, and then bam! I stomp on the branch and snap it right in half. The pile instantly goes still. That stillness and quiet is right back. All of a sudden, this gigantic mountain lion with a bloody nose and mouth popped up out of the pile. At this point, I was only 10 yards away. I had my shotgun on me, but I didn't think I had enough time to raise it to shoot the lion before it could get to me. I also didn't want to fire a shot off in the air to scare it. In all honesty, this was a pretty cool experience that very few people will ever get to have. It froze and stared at me very quizzically. In one single motion, it hopped out of the brush pile, ran up the hill about 40 yards from me, and disappeared right into the trees. I had never seen something cover 40 yards uphill so fast. As scary and dangerous as it was also really cool. I went to check the brush pile when it left, and sure enough, it had been feasting on a mule deer. That's still my favorite out of all the woods stories I'll probably ever tell. A couple of years back, I was 17 years old, and I was really big into Snapchat. Honestly, I was kind of obsessed with building my Snap score. I would often add random friends and accept random requests in order to do so. One day, I really needed a ride to a pawn shop to sell something, so I posted on my story asking if anyone was able to pick me up and take me. I was more so expecting a close friend to respond and offer to give me a ride. But instead, I instantly got a text from some girl I had never talked to before. She was my friend on Snapchat, but we had never had a single conversation, nor shared any pictures back and forth. She texted me something along the lines of, "Where are you heading?" I replied to her saying I needed a ride to the pawn shop. I then proceeded to ask if she even lived in the same state as me. Turned out she did. The place she said she lived was about a 2-hour drive away. I told her not to worry about it. That was way too far, and I didn't want her to have to drive 2 hours just to take me down to the shop. I mean, as long as you have the gas money, it's cool with me. I'm bored anyway. For some reason, that didn't quite sit well in my gut. I told her again that it was alright, but she was being very insistent. I agreed that she could come and pick me up if she was willing to send me a picture of herself first. I just wanted to be cautious before meeting up with someone I didn't know at all. She sent me the picture and it did check out after reverse image searching and all that. She then asked me what my address was to come pick me up. Now, I've always been a cautious person, so I didn't feel comfortable directly sharing my address. Instead, I gave her the address to a gas station that was about a 15-minute walk away from my house. She replied immediately, saying she would be on her way very shortly. I sat there contemplating things for a solid 5 minutes or so. I suddenly really got a feeling that I should not go through with this. I texted her once again. "Hey, so sorry, my friend just pulled up out of nowhere and said he's gonna take me. Sorry for the inconvenience, maybe we can chill some other time." My friend was not there. I didn't want to chill with her later. I just had this bad feeling in my gut to not go through with this no matter what. The fact that she was willing to drive 2 hours to pick up someone she'd never met just didn't sit right with me. About a year later, I was now 18 and working at a grocery store. I took my lunch break and went out to my car to eat. I ended up getting a text on Facebook from a friend, which led me to hop on Facebook and scroll through my feed. As I was doing so, I passed a news story that had one of those attachments because it was sourced from a different website. Usually, I would always just scroll past those things, but I had caught a glimpse of whoever was on the cover of the article and scrolled back up immediately. Something about this person was very familiar. When I scrolled back up, I got the chills instantly. It was that girl who had messaged me on Snapchat a year prior. The headline of the attachment stated she had just been arrested for attempted murder. I know there's a possibility that maybe she wasn't a bad person before. Maybe something happened during the meantime to make her attempt such a thing. Something, though, tells me I dodged a major bullet by trusting my gut and deciding not to go with her that day. I was lucky enough to live in a large house when I was a kid. My father was a physical therapist. My house had a side room towards the back side of the first floor. My siblings called it the second living room because that's basically what it was. It had an old recliner, a small table, and a mid-sized couch. That's about it. We basically hardly ever went in there. One morning, I woke up very sick. I told my mom, and she told me to take the day off from school and stay at home. My siblings all still had to go though, and my parents both worked. That meant I had the house all to myself. I laid around in bed for a few hours until around 10:30 a.m. I began to hear steady walking coming from the first floor. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed maybe my mom was going in late like she did sometimes. I needed something to eat anyway though, so I stood up and started going downstairs to the kitchen. I'd made it about 3 feet in front of my kitchen's walk-in doorway when I locked eyes not with my mom, but with a 6-foot-tall man wearing raggy and ripped-up clothes. I was frozen immediately in fear. I stood there, not knowing what to do. It was only for a few moments, but it felt like hours had passed by. The man just stood there, watching me too, not a single expression or anything. Eventually, I pulled myself out of the shock and bolted for my bedroom upstairs. I didn't hear the guy following me, but when I got to my bedroom, I locked the door and moved the dresser in front of it anyway. I pulled out my phone, and instead of calling 911 like I should have, I called my mom. I screamed into the phone, telling her someone was now in the house trying to kill me. She told me not to leave my room for any reason and to call the police. That's exactly what I did. 15 minutes later, the police finally showed up. I could see them pull up through my bedroom window. I watched them enter the house before I left my room to run down to them for safety. I told them everything that had happened. They did a quick search of the home but found nothing. Not a single person or broken window or door. My parents both came home shortly thereafter and were absolutely furious the guy had not been caught. I was extremely angry as well, but I was also just relieved to still be alive. The police began to pack their things up, but one of the last officers was on the way out when he noticed a Walmart bag sticking out from underneath our couch. It was that damn couch in the side room, and well, what do you know? We found hundreds of trash bags and week-old rotting food underneath, along with some other personal items like wipes, water bottles, and even a bag full of piss. Yeah, a damn bag of fucking piss. Whoever that man in the kitchen was, he had been living underneath our couch for weeks. I still can't comprehend how none of my family members smelt any of that garbage that was piled up under there the entire time. The fact he somehow managed to never make a single alerting noise also baffles the hell out of me. We've since cleaned that room out completely and turned it into a breakfast nook with wooden chairs, so no more shitheads can break in and find free housing in them. I go off to college in a few months, so I won't have to live in fear of that incident happening again much longer. I do still think about it though, every single time I wake up with a cough.